If your company collects data from someone in Germany and from someone in Delhi, you are now operating under two completely different legal frameworks on privacy. One is 5 years older, covers more types of data, and has already fined companies over €1 billion. And the other is still filling in the details. This video is a complete structured comparison of two of the most important data protection laws in the world. Europe's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which came into force in 2018, and India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, that is the DPDP Act, enacted in 2023. Let's now go through them side by side. Before we get into the differences between GDPR and DPDP, let's start with what both laws agree on. At their core, the GDPR and the DPDP Act share the same fundamental goal: to ensure that personal data is processed responsibly and lawfully, while balancing individual rights, state interests, and operational continuity. That sentence could appear in either law. Both are built on the same idea. Data belongs to people, not companies. Companies that collect it are stewards, not owners. But here's where they diverge. GDPR approaches this with a wide, comprehensive lens, covering all kinds of personal data across borders with extensive rules. The DPDP Act takes a more targeted approach. Digital data only, India first, and deliberately calibrated to also support ease of doing business. Same destination, different rules. Now let's look at where each law came from and who it applies to. The GDPR came into effect in May 2018. It replaced a patchwork of older EU data protection directives from the 1990s. It is comprehensive, rights-based, and this is the key point: it is extraterritorial. That means it doesn't matter where your company is based. If you process data of someone in the EU, GDPR applies to you. Full stop. A startup in Bangalore, a tech firm in Singapore, a retailer in New York, all subject to GDPR if they target EU residents. And crucially, GDPR covers all personal data, digital or non-digital. Paper records, physical files, everything is in scope. India's DPDP Act was enacted in 2023. This is India's first dedicated digital data protection law. It's more focused and by design more streamlined. It covers digital personal data only. Offline data is excluded unless it has been digitized. Territorially, it applies within India and to processing outside India where Indian users are involved. So, in scope terms, GDPR is broader, but DPDP is very sharp. Now, here is one of the most structurally important differences between the two frameworks: the legal basis for processing personal data. In plain terms, under what circumstances is a company allowed to use your data? That is the question. Under GDPR, there are 6 legal bases. Consent is just one of them. A company can also rely on contractual necessity, that is, if they need your data to fulfill a contract with you. Legal obligation, if a law requires them to hold it. Vital interests, in life or death situations. Public tasks for government functions. Legitimate interests, a more flexible judgment-based ground. This multi-basis systems gives organizations real flexibility. They don't always need to ask for consent. They can rely on other legal grounds when appropriate. India's DPDP Act takes a narrower but sharper view. It has 2 primary grounds: consent and a set of legitimate uses defined within the Act itself. Consent is the centerpiece of the DPDP framework. It is the primary mechanism. The Act is fundamentally built around consent. What both laws agree on is a standard that consent must meet: free, specific, informed, and unambiguous. Pre-tick boxes, for example, are not valid under either law. Before we go further, let's quickly align on terminology, because the two laws use different names for almost the same things, and this trips people up constantly. Who controls the data? In GDPR, it is known as data controller. In DPDP, it is data fiduciary. Who process on behalf? Both laws call it the data processor. Whose data is it? In GDPR, it is the data subject. In DPDP, it is the data principal. What is personal data? The definitions are the same in both for personal data. Sensitive categories. In GDPR, they are known as special categories. In DPDP, it is known as sensitive personal data. The sharpest divergence. Sensitive data categories. GDPR has a detailed, explicitly defined list. The DPDP delegates those categories to separate government rules, which as of now are still pending. There is a significant gap for compliance teams to watch. Both frameworks give individuals real, enforceable rights over their own data. Let's look at the common rights which both the frameworks give. 1. Right to access. Ask any company to tell you what they hold and how they use it. The right to correction. So you require inaccurate data to be fixed. Right to erasure. You have the right to request deletion when data is no longer needed or consent is withdrawn. Let us look at now the GDPR only rights. So GDPR goes further with 3 additional rights not found in the DPDP Act. The right to data portability, that is, receive your data in a structured, machine-readable format. DPDP has interoperability provisions, but they are framed slightly differently, so we will discuss that later. The right to object, challenge processing based on a legitimate interest or opt out of direct marketing. Automated decision making, process and protections against AI or algorithms making significant decisions about you without human oversight. Let's now move on to DPDP specific rights. The DPDP Act does not replicate many of those rights but introduces 2 of its own. Right to grievance redressal, a formal mechanism to raise complaints directly with the company holding your data. And very interestingly, right of nomination. You can designate another person to exercise your data rights on your behalf. There is no equivalent in GDPR. So, GDPR has a broader catalog. DPDP is more concise. But the nomination right is very, very novel and different in DPDP. Now, let's talk about what companies actually have to do to comply. GDPR. Deeper procedural obligations. The emphasis is on accountability, being able to demonstrate compliance, not just practice it. Records of processing activities, which is known as ROPA. A detailed internal register of every type of data processing you do. Data protection impact assessments, that is DPIA. Mandatory risk assessments before any high-risk processing. Data protection officers, that is a DPO, mandatory for public authorities and large-scale data processors. Privacy by design and default. Data protection built into systems from the start, not bolted on afterwards. Let's look at the DPDP Act core accountability obligations. Fewer procedural layers, but don't mistake simplicity for weakness here. Its core obligations are enforceable and significant. Clear notice. Plain language notice to individuals before collecting their data. Valid consent mechanisms, properly implemented, not buried in terms and conditions. Data security safeguards, appropriate to the scale and sensitivity of data held. Enabling of user rights, working mechanisms for access, correction, and erasure. So if you look at it, GDPR demands more documentation. DPDP demands clear, user-facing implementation. In a globalized economy, data crosses borders constantly. Both laws regulate this, but in almost opposite ways. GDPR has a restrictive regime. So there is an allow list approach. Transfers are restricted by default. You can only send EU personal data to another country if one of three conditions is met. 1. Adequacy decision. 2. Standard contractual clauses, which are EU approved contract templates. Binding corporate rules, or internal transfer rules approved by a EU supervisory authority for intra-group transfers. This is a significant compliance burden for multinational operations. Whereas the DPDP Act has an open regime. So it has a block list approach. India has taken the opposite stance. Cross-border transfers are permitted by default. The government can, by notification, restrict transfers to specific countries, but unless a country is on that restricted list, you can send data there freely. This is deliberately more business-friendly. Most global data flows remain permissible without additional legal mechanisms. For organizations operating between India and other countries, this is a significant practical difference between GDPR and DPDP. Finally, enforcement. Because a law without teeth is just guidance. GDPR enforcement. Enforcement sits with national data protection authorities. One in each EU member state who can act on complaints or investigate on their own initiative. The fines are significant, up to 20 million euros or 4% of global annual turnover, whichever is higher. DPDP Act enforcement, if you want to see, the enforcement body is the Data Protection Board of India, a newly created statutory authority. Financial penalties are graded by violation severity, and there is an appellate mechanism built into the framework. The board is new and its enforcement track record is still being established, but the legislative intent is very, very clear. In summary, 4 key differences. Scope. GDPR covers digital and offline personal data. DPDP covers digital personal data only. The legal basis. GDPR gives you 6 grounds to process data. DPDP centers everything on consent. Rights. GDPR has a broader catalog including portability and automated decision making. DPDP is more concise but introduces the unique right of nomination. Transfers. GDPR is restrictive by default. DPDP is permissive by default. Organizations operating across both jurisdictions must comply with the stricter standard for each obligation. You cannot pick the easier law. You will have to do both. Understanding these two frameworks is not just a legal exercise. It is a business imperative for any company operating in or with Europe or India, which between them represent over 1.8 billion people.